a really interesting interaction took place on Joe Rogan's podcast with Bono of U2, where Bono confronted Rogan with the information about the damage, and this is particularly relevant now as Elon is in notable fashion left the Trump administration, just the damage that in a short time he did, and people mass suffering that's being caused. And I think that given all this going on, we can forget to break down the specifics of that, and so we're going to do it more substantively than just Rogan's wrong and Bono's right. Really get into the nuts and bolts. So do stick with us for it. Do want to introduce, before we get into these clips and talk about the fact checks, etc., Brittany Page, the wonderful and beautiful.
Hello, Luke. Thank you for having me. I am not prepared, because I was just prepared to come on here and say, listen, Joe Rogan's wrong and Bono's right. So I'm like a little panicked. Is that, you want me to go deeper than that? Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Okay. So. Oh no. Let me get some notes together. I'm kidding. I have them. I'm ready.
The funny thing is, last time we collabed, you were saying, I'm pausing, waiting for a soundbite, but now we never know when Cole's going to hit us with it, with the
I'm so stressed about it constantly, honestly. I never know.
Well, now
I never know.
He has this soundbite that's the TikTok video outro, boom, boom, and he just plays it sometimes. It drives me crazy. So we have fun. But here's the first clip, and then we'll dive into the specifics. I find it really interesting. In the second clip, Rogan does admit, they probably made some big mistakes.
Just recent report. It's not proven, but the surveillance enough suggests 300,000 people have already died from just this cut off, this hard cut of USAID. So there's food rotting in boats, in warehouses. There is this will fuck you off. You will not be happy. No American will. But there is, I think it's 50,000 tons of food that are stored in Djibouti, South Africa, Dubai, and wait for it, Houston, Texas. And that is rotting rather than going to Gaza, rather than going to Sudan, because the people who know the codes or for the warehouse are fired. They're gone. And so this, I don't know, what do you think? What is that? That's not America, is it?
Well, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Right. This is the problem. The problem is, for sure, there have been a lot of organizations that do tremendous good all throughout the world. Also, for sure, it was a money laundering operation. For sure, there was no oversight. For sure, billions of dollars are missing. In fact,
where are you getting the for sure confidence? I saw it on Twitter.
Trillions.
Wouldn't it be nice?
That are unaccounted for, that were sent off into various, they don't even know where, because there's no receipts. The way Elon Musk described it, he said if any of this was done by a public company, the company would be delisted and the executives would be in prison. But in the United States, this is standard. When Biden left office, when it was clear that Trump won, in the 73 days, they spent $93 billion from the Department of Energy on just radical loans, just throwing money into places. Right. And there's no oversight.
So we'll get to part two, which is Rogan eventually coming around full circle and going, but I do love how I was wondering, what sources is he citing? He goes, Elon told me that.
Right.
So let me know, do you want to do the second or address some of that first?
Let's go through some of it, because there's so much there. And I have to say, I was really, really impressed with Bono. And when I was going through fact checking his claims, everything that he laid out there was correct, even down to the specific 4 locations that he named for warehouses where food is just expiring and getting moldy and going to be turned into animal feed or incinerated. So he was completely right. He said 50,000 tons of food. According to Reuters reporting, it is 66,000 tons, but metric tons. So the math there is a little bit different, but either way, he's, on the right track. He's exactly right when he's talking about why this is happening. I mean, you get rid of thousands of USAID employees who are terminated or put on leave, and then you're not going to have people who are able to fulfill the orders, fulfill the contracts, and deliver these food rations for the millions of people that they are supposed to be going to. So it's disturbing because the food that is going bad, it is valued at over $98 million, according to a document reviewed by Reuters. So this is a significant amount of money. It's a significant amount of food. It goes toward people who don't have enough to eat. It goes toward children who are malnourished. And to just read a specific example from that Reuters article that you have up, Luke, they write, quote, nearly 500 metric tons of high-energy biscuits stored at a USAID warehouse in Dubai are due to expire in July. According to a former USAID official and an aide familiar with the inventories, the biscuits could feed at least 27,000 acutely malnourished children for a month, according to Reuters calculations. The biscuits are now likely to be destroyed or turned into animal feed, adding that in a typical year, only around 20 metric tons of food might be disposed of in this way because of damage in transit or storage. So that's a significant loss, especially when you're talking about lives being at stake. So when Bono is talking about lives, by the way, he talked about how 300,000 people have already died as a result of the DOGE cuts. Now, here's where he's getting that number. He's getting that number from a mathematician and professor of infectious disease at Boston University named Brooke Nichols. And Brooke Nichols evaluated the loss of life due to these cuts for USAID. And you can see these for yourself at a website called impactcounter.com, where they're actually tracking these deaths in real time, deaths per hour. And so as you can see there, Bono was correct. We're over 300,000 deaths. Now, this is not actual deaths. These are predictions based on statistical modeling. But as Brooke Nichols said in an article that I read, we don't have routine data sets that can measure someone as killed by U.S. lack of funding. So her methodology uses data from last year, looking at estimates from program terminations and mortality data to estimate the impact of these cuts. But it's important to know that her tracker has actually been peer reviewed by colleagues at the HIV Modeling Consortium, who have endorsed her numbers. So this is a peer-reviewed model. Her research, even though it is an estimate and it's not actual deaths, that it has been peer-reviewed. So it's just wildly disturbing. And I think that's why you see Joe Rogan immediately try to get away from what Bono is saying, because when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people dying as a result of these cuts, you're talking about tens of thousands metric tons of food expiring and going to waste, millions of dollars worth of food going to waste that could be keeping people alive. Of course, you're going to want to start spinning some theories and get away from that reality, because it makes you and your people, the people you support politically, it makes you look bad.
Yeah. Wow. Brilliantly explained. We'll play the second clip, but just quickly, the waste, you have a part of it which is just cutting off programs that prevent and treat disease. You can pretty logically figure out how that's going to cause death. But
right.
The waste of stuff that we had the resources already allocated, and it was just them being so hasty in their implementation of this that led to people not getting food that they desperately need, runs right in the face of the whole idea behind DOGE being about efficiency in it. And it wasn't that. And actually, we've talked about before the analyses that go into in more detail how gutting programs of employees that allow them function often can, the example I cite most often because it's kind of clear with the IRS, can lose the government money. If you rip away a bunch of employees who are doing tax enforcement and they don't get that tax revenue, we lost more money than we saved in those employees not being hired. And all of it was for show. And now Elon's nuclear against Trump, and none of it is really standing and none of it has been meaningful. But the pain, the achievements were not meaningful, but the pain is very much meaningful. It's shocking. Let's watch the second clip and then we'll discuss further. Last thing I promise, please do click the subscribe button if you appreciate this channel. And then Brittany, if you search Brittany Page on YouTube, sometimes I wait to do this till the end, want to do in the middle, you can support her work.
The whole thing is, there's a lot of fraud, a lot of money laundering, but also we help the world. And when you're talking about making wells for people in the Congo to get fresh water, when you're talking about food and medicine to places that don't have access, like, no way that should have been cut out. And that should have been clear before they make these radical cuts. Like, there's got to be a way to keep aid and not have fraud. And you can't say we're going to kill everything so that there's no fraud. But then you're killing all the good, and you're doing it without letting anybody know it's going to happen. So it's not like they had 3 years to prepare. Let's build a new infrastructure. Let's make sure that everything's set up. They wanted change, and they want to change quickly. And due to the nature of American politics, they have about 2 years before the midterms, right? So everything has to get done as quickly as possible. You have to show a growth in GDP. You have to show that the economy's booming again under these ideas. Make America first, tariffs for the world, bring back American manufacturing, and this mad rush to do it all as quickly as possible while cutting out as much waste as possible.
Yeah.
But the ironic thing is, even though Elon Musk has proposed all these things and the Doge Committee has proposed all these things, they've made no cuts in terms of the budget. They've cut nothing.
It's
they vote
such
against
a tiny part. I mean, if it's big government or whatever, people want to shrink. I get the instinct, but the life-saving part, it's like the little finger of.
Yeah, that's the other part. When people say, wait, you don't like Doge, does that mean you don't want efficiency or whatever? It's no, they showed themselves to so clearly not have that as an objective. I just gave you examples. But then also, if you were serious about making huge savings in the federal government, why on earth would you start with USAID and do so in a way that isn't... When Rogan's talking about you're not making huge changes with the budget approved by Congress, so you are somehow able, and it's like you would have to try to do this, you're somehow able to make no real dent in the big government problem you say you're trying to solve, but ruin a bunch of people's lives and cause people to lose their lives. How they figured out to do both is absolutely stunning, Brittany.
Yeah, I was also really struck by Joe Rogan speaking there because he sounds good, like his cadence is good and he's not tripping over himself and he's like a smooth talker, but he was contradicting himself almost from sentence to sentence. Like the transition between clip 1 to clip 2, it was like that could have been a completely different day talking to a completely different person. It was remarkable to see that, and I don't really know how to make sense of that other than he talks for a living for hours a day, so he's really good at that, and maybe he's just not tracking whether what he's saying is logical. But, when it comes to the quote-unquote savings that Doge is claiming, there's a lot of numbers that have been kicked around. I think the latest one that they're saying is now $175 billion in savings that Doge is claiming. Of course, that falls short of Elon's original goal of $2 trillion of the $7 trillion budget. And he even revised that once he got in there to $1 trillion, and he still, by his own estimate, fell short of that. But a lot of this included terminating like real estate leases and terminating contracts. And as it pertains to this story, closing warehouses where many tons of food for malnourished children are being held. A few months ago, Doge claimed that they closed like 2,500 federal contracts across 47 departments, that they had terminated those contracts. So that's where a lot of their quote unquote savings came from. And you heard Joe Rogan say that USAID is a money laundering operation and talked about how there's no receipts for the spending and that there was no oversight. What I find interesting about that is that's actually what people who have been investigating Doge say about Doge, right? That there was no way to track their claims and that they weren't forthcoming with their receipts. Of course, they had the quote unquote wall of receipts, right? But how often did we see them put something up and then have to take it down without any announcement of a correction? I mean, I think that happened in February when they claimed $16.5 billion in cuts, but they claimed half of that from a typo where they said they were saving $8 billion and it was actually $8 million. So Doge has been all over the place. And when you talk about keeping receipts, they have not been keeping receipts. So a lot of what Joe Rogan said as an attack on USAID could actually be true, but if he were saying it about Doge.
Yeah, and I just haven't seen those claims substantiated. The other thing to your point, is they'll act like they're canceling contracts when those contracts were already up or something. They'll take credit for any completions of contracts or retiring of employees or anything and just lump all that in. And so if you really think about what the real number is, it's so small in comparison to the broader problem they say they're trying to solve. And it gets absolutely annihilated in whatever progress that would make on the debt because of the big, beautiful bill, if that gets through, and these huge tax cuts. Just the tax cuts for the top 1%, quintuple or whatever, even more, the supposed savings of Doge. So all of it was for nothing. I think that failure, clearly Elon, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, he responded to someone with, did my best whenever they were outlining how this isn't really making a difference. I think it's a part of why he's now going so nuclear on Trump, because he feels humiliated by this whole affair. Introduce, if you would, this David Brooks clip.
Yeah, just to say, I totally agree with you on that. You're so right about that. I actually had it written in my notes that don't just say Joe Rogan is wrong and Bono is right. Okay, so this is David Brooks. He's a long-time conservative columnist in the New York Times, and he regularly appears on the PBS NewsHour to do kind of like a right-left segment where he's talking about his perspective on the news with someone else that doesn't necessarily agree with him. So I found this remarkable. They were talking about the exact exchange here that Joe Rogan and Bono were having about the Doge cuts, about what Elon Musk's legacy is going to be. And David Brooks, what he says here, I think, is so remarkable coming from a conservative.
As a budget matter, you would not say he had a big effect, but he did manage to destroy NIH and USAID. And the USAID one is the one I haven't gotten over. And so there's folks at Boston University who count how many people have died because of what Doge did at USAID. And USAID was a very ill-managed organization. That's true. But according to the Boston University folks, so far 55,000 adults have died of AIDS in the 4 months since Trump was elected. 6,000 children are dead because of what Doge did. That's just PEPFAR, the HIV. You add them all up, that's 300,000 dead, and we're 4 months in. Now you accumulate that over 4 years, the number of dead grows very high. There are mass murderers in the world, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong, Stalin. We don't have anybody on the list from America. And I don't think it's the same as committing the kind of genocide they did. But by taking away that agency and being at least semi-responsible for the deaths of probably by the end of this hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, that's Elon Musk's legacy. And the people who work at Tesla and SpaceX might want to think about that.
Right? I know. Hearing Stalin and Pol Pot. And I mean, to hear a conservative talk about what Elon Musk's legacy is going to be is remarkable using those terms. That's not a progressive. That's not, that's not an AOC. That is someone who, up until very recently, was a Republican. He, is anti-Trump, but he is a conservative. He agrees with a lot of conservative principles. So to hear him talk like that about these cuts, it's pretty remarkable. And it may be a good sign that some of this is getting through, that if people understand the impact of these cuts, because I think Americans want to tell themselves a story that they are compassionate, that they are generous, that we are a country that can help other people, that we use our resources for good. And if that's true, why are we doing this? Why are we wasting millions of dollars worth of food that's just sitting there and going to go to animal waste and be incinerated? I mean, this is horrifying to anyone who really thinks about it and just stops for a second to evaluate what we're doing here. So I think that clip from David Brooks is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, indeed. Agree with everything you said. Okay, I also want to touch on, going to make the segment a little bit thick, but the story you brought about the administration trying to suppress data that it doesn't like.
Yeah, so this is not much of a surprise because this is kind of the tactic that we're seeing from Republicans, right? They don't want people to know the truth. I mean, it's kind of the theme of this segment, actually. So this is new reporting from Politico. Trump officials delayed farm trade report over deficit forecast. Trump administration officials delayed and redacted a government forecast because it predicts an increase in the nation's trade deficit in farm goods later this year, according to two people familiar with the matter. Now, why is he doing this? Because it makes his tariffs look bad. That second paragraph there. The numbers run counter to President Donald Trump's messaging that his economic policies, including tariffs, tariffs will reduce U.S. trade imbalances. The politically inconvenient data prompted administration officials to block publication of the written analysis normally attached to the report because they disliked what it said about the deficit. So now we're entering territory where the Trump administration is willing to censor information about government data, what we know to be true using government data that is paid for by taxpayer dollars, paid to collect that data. We're paying for it. Now attempting to censor that information because it makes Donald Trump look bad.
Yep. And this is what scares me is so much valuable information we get to understand our population, the problems that we have, where poverty stands, how this program's working to reduce poverty, how these kids are doing with their education, how our economy's doing, how the jobs market is, how we're comparing to other countries. A lot of that comes from the federal government, because they're the ones with access to the resources to gather that data, like you said, and we collectively invest in getting those reports and those analyses to understand what's happening. Because to solve problems, we have to understand them, and the federal government does a lot of that. And what scares me about as Trump kind of gets his claws into the government more and more over the next few years is increasingly having a difficult time understanding what we can believe, what data sets we can believe coming from them whenever they cite achievements or give us the stuff normally is pretty dependable, nonpartisan groups. But now, because of the obsession that Trump has with nothing under the government being independent and it all being politicized, it's going to become increasingly difficult to know what are the border crossing numbers, what is this, data point about economic performance, and how much influence is being put on the people collecting that data to skew it towards Trump, because we have already on the record proof that he's very willing to try to suppress information that he doesn't like.
Right. And we already have a media literacy problem. We already have a disinformation problem. And so to have those typically reliable resources no longer be reliable is a really scary thing. But you're right. The motivation here is also the insecurity that Donald Trump has, where he cannot be wrong. He cannot look bad. And Republicans know that these various issues are political liabilities. If the people understand what's actually happening, the damaging impact of their policies, then they know that the people are going to turn on them. I mean, the most recent example of this is them trying to hide the impact of the Medicaid cuts. There was a new Congressional Budget Office report that says the number of Americans without health insurance will increase by 16 million by 2034, given the Republican plan for spending. And this is an estimate, right? Just like we talked about previously, it's an estimate, but it's right up there with other estimates from other organizations, including the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which estimated at least 15 million. So this is significant. And again, it's a political liability because people are going to be harmed. People will die from losing health insurance. So again, this is another instance similar to USAID, where it is in Republicans' best interest to downplay the truth, to hide the truth, because when people know the truth, they don't want to support Republicans. They don't want to support Republican policies.
Never a truer phrase. Brittany, you're amazing. Remind people where they can support your work.
You can find me right here on YouTube by searching my name, Brittany Page, or clicking the link in the description, I think.
Yep. Thanks.